Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ellinwood Museum. In 1992, 3 local businessmen, George Miller and Willie Schultz and myself, Larry Panning, established a nonprofit association to provide a means by which the Ellinwood community could participate in preservation of a part of Ellinwood's pioneer history. The association purchased the only Ellinwood site on the State Historic Register known as the Dick Building, but more recently called the Ellinwood Tunnels. Ellinwood's early pioneer days were very exciting and most challenging, and what you are about to see and hear are stories of those adventurous times. Sit back and enjoy some of Ellinwood's history and tour the tunnels of those early years.
Welcome to Ellinwood, a very important site on the renowned Santa Fe Trail.
One thing I found reviewing the newspapers about this period of time was how people moved around. Sometimes on one weekend there would be 11 businesses switch places on Main Street at one time. A harness shop moving to where a barber shop was, a barber shop moving to where a dress shop was, and just on around. And sometimes they would be there 90 days, sometimes only 30 days, and they'd move right back. So the influx and outgo of businessmen in these buildings, except for like standards like Meyer and Son, were tremendous. You kind of keep track of who was where at any given period of time. I can't answer why they dug all these tunnels and basements and everything, but it was a compulsion to them. They had, obviously it was cooler down here, but that didn't seem to affect them because the main businesses didn't go down here. It seemed like the main businesses stayed on Main Street, and the smaller businesses, your harness shops, your billiard halls, that type of business went down in the basements or in the lowered areas. But I can see why businesses would be down here. It had to be cooler in the winter and not as hard to heat cooler in summer, not as hard to heat in the winter. They're significant, but you can't be documented because it was something that was there. They didn't need to write about them. It was obvious, and it's just awful hard to put your finger on. That's the mystique about the tunnels yet, I guess, today, is you really don't know who did them, at what time, although I'm sure they were dead when the buildings were built, when they were closed, other than when I closed a few of them. They just have this mystique that nobody can, it's just unheard of. It's just like asking your mother where her great-grandfather come from and he never telling her, you just don't know. That's my version of it. I've read every issue of every Ellinwood newspaper and book up to 1908 as of today, and I've never heard him mention them yet. They were active.
The AIDS Memorial Quilt started as a vision by a man named Cleve Jones, who started noticing that a lot of his friends were dying. He lives in San Francisco, lived in the Castro district, and tons of his friends were dying all around him, and nobody was doing anything. No one cared. The whole community was just disappearing. So he got together with a couple of friends, went out in the backyard, and took this piece of cloth and spray painted it with stencils, triangles, and his friend's name, Marvin Feldman, spray painted the name on this piece of cloth, and the piece of cloth was 3 feet by 6 feet, which is about the size of a grave. And he got some other friends together who did the same thing, and kind of as a protest to make people notice what was going on. The people were dying, and no one was doing anything, and they needed to be remembered, and this was a good way to remember them. So they all got together, and it grew and grew and grew, and they started doing small displays. To make a long story short, he knew it was going to get big when he got his first out-of-state panel. People had gotten word, and they started coming from out of state, and then they came from overseas. And the thing just grew and grew and grew from the mid-70s to a few panels to the 45,000 that there are today.
When I worked at another college about 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to view the quilt at Kansas State University when I had taken some students there to visit. I was very moved by the event. I, like many people, were unaware of how enormous the epidemic is, how many people it affects. I had come in contact with it when I was in college. I had a very good friend who was a hemophiliac and had contracted AIDS and eventually died from AIDS. And so after viewing the quilt, it had always kind of been in the back of my mind that this is something everybody should have the opportunity to see. And about a year ago, in January, well, over a year and a half ago, I kind of said, I'm in a good position now, I'm pretty settled. I think I want to take on that project of bringing the quilt here. And so when I got the information, I took it to the Barton County AIDS Task Force, and I spoke to them about how would you feel about us joining together and bringing this event to Barton County. And they were very receptive, and so for the past year and a half, we've all worked closely together in bringing the quilt to Barton County and the surrounding counties, central Kansas, essentially. We knew we were having a lot of panels come, and it was essentially up to us. Did we want to open them all or have some open? And we said, no, we want to open them all. We want to kind of add that entertainment and dramatic effect to it. So Julie Cramp here on campus at the Community Education Department was in charge of the volunteers, and a lot of the volunteers just kind of called her and said, I want to be part of this. We spoke to a lot of civic organizations and spoke to groups on campus and showed them a videotape about the AIDS Memorial Quilt and said, it's coming here, would you like to help? And a lot of people were very willing and said, yes, I'll help, I'll do anything. We had some cadets from the high school, we had the nursing department, we had several groups of people that said, I want to help unfold. And we needed 15 teams of unfolders, and 8 people were in a team. So we had well over 100 people helping us just unfold the quilt on opening ceremonies, which is a lot of people to have volunteer, but we had over 200 volunteers in all.
In Section R of the Great Bend, Kansas Municipal Cemetery can be found the grave of the pioneer black filmmaker and author, Oscar Micheaux. At a time in American history when a new art form was born and racism was a constant presence in society, Oscar Micheaux was able to accomplish extraordinary achievements. He was the first African American to write and publish a best-selling novel. He wrote 7 novels in all. He was the first African American to produce a feature film. He was the first African American to produce a talking feature film. He was the first African American to produce a film that opened in white theaters. He has a star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame. Oscar Micheaux was responsible for the production of 43 feature films in his lifetime. On the 50th anniversary of his death, people from all around the United States gathered in Great Bend, Kansas to celebrate this pioneer and to learn more about a talented man and his legacy.
My interest in Oscar Micheaux is my interest in history, and he's a historic figure, not just in black cinema, but the whole period that he writes about and makes films about is a part of our history that we're kind of rediscovering, and I find it fascinating, to explore this man's life and his family and his presence in different parts of the country, because it tells us something very specific about, not just about Micheaux, but about the black community and about black families and our history.
I am here for 2 reasons. Actually, we're here to shoot a story for Sunflower Journeys, which is our weekly television series on Kansas events, people, and places. And actually, I'm here because I'm a big silent film fan. And this kind of stuff fascinates me. I mean, the fact that people were able to make great and sometimes very moving films in an era when you had a technical limitation of no sound and frequently no color is really something I enjoy. That's something I enjoy exploring because and seeing this side of it. This is a particular side. Black films are something I am totally foreign to. I mean, I've really rarely ever seen any of them. I have seen a couple of Oscar Micheaux films, but they're something completely out there for me. I've never experienced these before. And seeing this material now with these speakers who come in and talk about them and talk them up, shall we say, really is a lot of fun. This is a great thing to be at and to partake in.
Okay, I'm writing my thesis on the close reading of 3 films. It's probably going to be Within Our Gates, Body and Soul, and then the later film, yet to be determined, probably Sound from his later era. And I'm looking at why his aesthetic has been maligned, why people say if he had only had money, he could have made great films, and he's totally tied to his social circumstances, and I don't disagree that his financial circumstances dictated how he made his films look the way they do. But I don't think that that was necessarily a flaw, and I think that if he had more money, I don't necessarily think that that would have been a positive circumstance, and that that would have made his project, which was middle-class black films, more successful. Because if you're showing these glossy films and the project is middle-class uplift, you're not being true to your inner project. And he was true, and everything he wrote and everything he did was keeping it in contract with that sort of middle-class black aesthetic.
Well, originally they were installed in the first Congregational Church in Great Bend back in 1910 through 1911. They were in that church until 1960 when the church was demolished. At that point in time, Mrs. Dorothy M. Morrison acquired them, and then later in the 90s, at the beginning of the 90s, donated them to the Barton County Community College. It was here at the college that they remain in storage for over a decade. And just recently they have come to light, or out into the light once again, and they have been fully restored and will be installed in the Barton County Community College chapel. These panes were very detailed, very delicately put together. There are multi-shades of hues within each of the painted panes, and a lot of these panes were cracked, which meant that they had to be taken out and then fully restored. In other words, painted, and by painted I mean glazed, and then fired in a kiln, and then repainted, then glazed again, and probably multiple times, and then reinstalled in the window. Some of the glass that was missing had to be matched and then repaired, and it's been a long, complicated process.
Well, Barton College was interesting to me because I had, when I was contacted on that, we had first went out years ago and actually did an appraisal on the windows themselves. So they were interesting windows at that point. Most of them had a lot of firing in there, a lot of really great art. And that's something that challenges us. We like that. We like to learn. We like to be coming to that next level. And to go to that next level, you've got to be challenged. These windows were definitely a challenge in a sense because they used a lot of color, a lot of painting, and a lot of firing, and several different artists put them together.
I'm awestruck to be able to be so close to some of this, because the average person doesn't get to have hands-on with some of this stuff, and to see the talent that somebody had in the past is just awesome.
You know, I'm really proud of my staff. I'm proud of the dedication. They were so good about detail, and they were so good about perfectionism. And I mean, they repainted several pieces several times because as we viewed them in the light, and the thing about glass that's so difficult is when you put it in the light, the translucency of the glass changes all day long. And so we had to guess the lighting or the anticipated lighting of the windows to be able to get the pieces so they would match the current place that you're going to place the windows, actually.
Aesthetically, in other words, how much beauty is present whenever you look at these. These go off the scale. They're marvelous examples of turn-of-the-century glass.
Dr. James Robl is an alumnus of Barton County Community College. He attended Barton County from 1973 to 1975. The reason he is so important to go clear to Sioux Falls, South Dakota to interview is because Dr. Robl is a leader in the area of biotechnology. He not only is a leader, he's a pioneer. Many of his discoveries in his research in the areas of nuclear transfer, transgenics, and now polyclonal antibody research are widely known internationally and are used in that field of biotechnology.
Transova is a subcontractor of ours. The laboratory that we have here in Sioux Falls does the molecular biology. So what we do is the genetic manipulations on skin cells. We take those skin cells and through the cloning process, we turn those into cow embryos. The cow embryos then are shipped to Transova in northwestern Iowa and put into recipient animals. Transova then gestates the recipient animals, derives the calves by cesarean, and then maintains those calves so that we can then come back and immunize the calves against a variety of different agents and produce human antibodies that then are processed into a human therapeutic. So Transova is a subcontractor for doing the animal work for Hematech. Hematech at this point is primarily a research and development operation. We are in the process of developing our final cow production system.
Basically what we do here is we're part of the production of developing these transgenic animals for biomedical research purposes. We put a lot of care into these animals. It's just a facility that we can control these animals and basically set up for research purposes.
Well, this is an experiment in which we were combining cells from two different embryos together. And you can see that one of the embryos was from a cow that was black, and the other was from something that had a reddish coat color. And when we put the cells together and mixed them together, what you get is called a chimera, and it's actually a mixture of cells from the two. And you can see where the cells are for the black cow versus the cells for the red cow. So it's actually a mixture, not a crossbred, and it gives that interesting coat color pattern. So the bottom line is that our product is one that can be used for many different applications, but primarily its use is to help fight infections.
Micheaux is preaching to his audience. I mean, he's sort of putting up these stereotypes to have Black people discuss them, talk about them.
The theme of our event is celebrating artistic independence.
If you honor someone who deserves to be honored, you bring honor to yourself. So I think, Marty, you're bringing honor to yourself by honoring Oscar Micheaux.
This festival is very special. It's special because I always learn something when I get here.
My hope for making the film was to, in many ways, break open that taboo kind of subject and allow Americans, both black and white, to again talk about this.
The gauntlet that I throw down to today's independent filmmakers is to come up with something that is worth saying.
This festival is very special. It's special because I always learn something when I get here, because there are people who come, they all come with something, stories or whatever, and they are as excited as I am about talking about Micheaux. And it's a kind of nurturing experience.
I think that in many instances, Micheaux was using stereotypes for a very specific purpose. And in the instance of what you see in Body and Soul, it is somewhat like a moment when we can laugh at ourselves. And I heard that this morning when the film was going on. There were certain scenes that the people, members of the audience, were laughing. They weren't laughing because they were stereotypes. They were laughing because this is an opportunity to poke fun at ourselves.
The other thing that struck me about what you were saying is that she's almost like the anti-mammy. She's the exact opposite of every other black woman you've seen in a film in many ways at this point, where she's a mother and she's very mothering and so forth, but in the end she stands up like a man.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, and is clearly an equal, you know, is not a fool, is intelligent, is all the three dimensions that any hero would be.
You know, the independent cinema, I didn't realize this until recently, but a lot of the films I saw growing up in Great Bend at this theater were independent films, because a lot of the indies would come to the rural areas. Films made outside the Hollywood system are good films, they're important films, especially since they have artistic independence. Nobody's telling them what to do. So basically a celebration of the independent cinema, I think, is really important.
This festival is really important in a lot of different ways. You know, Marty's just done such a great job at keeping the Micheaux connection in terms of Great Bend and Kansas really alive, and that's really important in so many different ways. And as well, I think I see the festival as kind of growing into more of an independent film festival now as well, which is very exciting, and I hope they can continue that.
So I'm supposed to talk about challenges facing the independent filmmaker today. The equipment that my students use, digital video equipment, is cheaper and of higher quality than at any point in the past. Everyone is learning more about the actual work of making movies. And they're seeing that it's not that hard.
And I went out to LA and worked on a couple really bad, low-budget films out there. And people have asked me, well, why didn't I stay in LA? You know, why did I come back? And frankly, I knew that if I stayed in LA, I would have ended up working for at least probably 10 years as a production assistant or a boom operator or helping a gaffer or grip sort of thing. And maybe at a certain point, someone would say, you know, I'd come up with a script in some really low budget, bad film way. They'd say, okay, go make that, just add some sex and violence to it, you know. And I knew I needed to start making films in order to get better at it, and I wouldn't have that chance in LA. It's ironic you could become a better filmmaker coming back to Kansas than to stay in LA and work out there.
Independent film is about getting it done, you know,